Hello and welcome to Fashion History 101, which shall be taught through the medium of shenanigans. Okay, so you know historical romance novels, how on the covers, they're rarely actually reflective of actual historical dress. The goal of these books is obviously to sell the notion of attractive humans, which I guess, I don't understand the argument for this because I think historical dress is fabulous, but I guess perhaps means that there is some sort of modern beauty standard that has to be adhered to in order to actually sell these books. Which, fortunately or unfortunately, fortunately for purposes of pure hilarity, often means we end up with book covers that are completely ahistorical, clearly a perfectly 21st century modern person in a costume. So naturally, I thought one day, wouldn't it be a good time to sit down and actually contemplate what these dresses would have looked like within the period that they are supposed to be depicting on the cover. Not in any way, of course, to say that these are how the book covers should have been designed, because they have a very specific purpose and they're clearly serving that purpose. But for the purposes of education on dress history, let us have a look at a few historical romance novels and see what can be done with them. The first selection we have is called Duke of My Heart. It takes place in the year 1819 in London. This is not in any sense what we are getting from the dress on the cover. This to me is saying roughly 1740s, 1730s, 1750. She is about 100 years too early to be depicting the time period that the story of the book is supposedly set in. Beginning with the hairstyle. The hairstyle that she's got on the cover is in no sense even vaguely historical to any time period. So we are going to instead put her in a little Regency updo. This is 1819, so we are at the very, very tail end of the Regency period, just moving into the Romantic period in the late 1820s and beginning of the 1830s. Fashion and sort of the general architecture, artistic aesthetic of this period is very reflective of Grecian and Roman and sort of classic era iconography. So the dresses that we see in this period are very slim, very column-esque. We see a lot of clean, simple silhouettes, and the hairstyles in this period, we've got the curls framing the face, and we've also got these sort of Grecian headbands that are very popular in this period. So we're saying she's an evening dress in this just because the dress that she looks like, the original cover looks like sort of court dress-ish. So we're saying she's in some sort of high fashion evening wear, and hairstyles of high fashion evening wear styles in the Regency period could often incorporate flowers, roses. For evening wear, little short puffy sleeves are very common, so we're going to give her little short puffy sleeves. She can also be wearing a little shawl because this is a very common way for these women to stay a bit warm in these dresses that aren't very substantial by this period. So we're going to do away with the 3/4 length and turn those into little puffy sleeves, as well as raising the waistline up to the underbust region, which is a feature of most fashionable dresses from about the mid-1790s all the way up through the mid-1820s. We're also going to give her dress fabric a little bit of pizzazz. Printing is super common in this period. We're starting to see a little bit of this A-line flare by the 1820s, so I'm going to give her dress a little bit of swoosh. They would put padded rolls on the hems or heavy trim decoration down in rows at the bottom to sort of hold out the bottoms of the skirts. Also, if she's in evening wear, she would be wearing elbow-length gloves, so we're going to put her in a pair of gloves. I know the woman on the cover is not wearing gloves, and that is a most scandalous thing, so we are going to rectify that situation and give her some proper gloves. So the next cover on our list is called Something Like Love, which takes place in 1888 and is about two people in sort of Midwestern to Western America. One of them is an outlaw, and the woman, she wants to be a seamstress. So we're looking at sort of working and professional style dress. So let's start with him. He is wearing a pair of jeans, which is historically accurate, so he can actually stay in his jeans. Anyway, denim jean fabric is actually a type of fabric. It's not a garment necessarily in and of itself, jean. It is a heavy twill woven cotton dyed with indigo, and it's actually been around for a while. The Levi Company, who were a manufacturer of these specific type of work pants, specifically cite, I believe it's the 20th of May, 1873, as the birthday of the jean, which is really just the day that they filed the patent for the specific little copper rivets that just make the pockets and thus the pants in general more secure and sort of standardized to the format of jean. But of course, denim fabric has been around for ages before that. That is all to say that by 1883, jeans are widely being sold, especially in this Western situation in America, and he would absolutely be wearing jeans. So the woman, who is called Olivia, she is a successful business owner and she is aspiring to become a seamstress. She has escaped a prospective arranged marriage with a man who was interested in her money, so presumably she's probably upper middle class to upper class. The problem with the cover image is that she is clearly wearing evening dress in what is clearly a daytime situation. So while she may be well dressed, she is probably not going to be dressing in evening dress. It looks as if she is sort of in more mid-century 1860, 50-ish evening dress. So we have to pull her more into the 1880s, which means we have to pull her into the bustle period, specifically the second bustle period. Only this time we're doing away with the big cage crinolines and we're really only doing sort of cage structures. Today, at least, we call them lobster tail bustles, which is really just a sort of cage worn sort of solely in the back of the skirt. And that means that in the second bustle period, we have much slimmer dresses in the front. We, of course, have to talk about the hair. They are going for the classic period romance hair flowing in the wind, which, I mean, I guess isn't historically inaccurate, but for the purposes of this project, let's put her hair up properly, as a proper 1880s woman would have. The 1880s are also very, very, very well known for very covered dresses. The dresses come all the way up to the neck. They are full-sleeved day dresses, I should say, because the evening dresses can have more décolletage as well as be sleeveless. We're starting to see a lot more in this period reflections of tailoring that's happening sort of in the menswear as well. So we see a lot of these sort of jacket front-like bodices. The other thing that's really popular is stripes in this period. They come in all sorts of colors. There are pink and there are purple and there are brown striped dresses. So we're going to put her in a nice purple and white striped gown. Cover number 3 is for The Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics, which supposedly takes place in 1816 in England. Not that you would really know from the cover of the book. They look very sort of mid-early 2000s. One of these women is a countess, and she owns this vast estate. The other one is a scholar, so one of them is probably a bit more highly dressed than the other. I would guess that the woman on the right in the red dress is supposed to be in some sort of evening dress. The woman on the left, she looks a little bit sort of like a Renaissance fair peasant blouse, but I'm going to interpret this as that she's in her underwear. And then she hypothetically has a petticoat on. There is actually a really interesting existing Regency chemise that's got these sort of swagged, puffy sleeves, which I assume are meant to hold out a sort of puffed sleeve on an outer dress. That's an existing garment, so it's fair game, and we're going to put her in that because that is reminiscent of what exists on the cover. Let's put her in a pair of short stays. In this Regency period, the short stays really only come from about the bottom of the rib cage, I guess, sort of up. So we're going to put her in a pair of short stays because why not? Let's do away with the petticoat and just call this the skirt portion of the chemise. It's a little bit tricky. It would not quite behave like it's behaving in the original cover image. Chemises or any Regency silhouette would be more straight cut, so it wouldn't have quite that much volume in it. So we're gonna be a little bit more conservative with the amount of fabric that we're showing here. So the other woman, we're saying that she's going to be in evening dress. There are loads of examples of nice, beautiful red Regency evening gowns out in the world. There's this one beautiful one. I think she's actually German, but you know what? She can have had a dress made in Germany, but it's this beautiful red velvet dress that I think would work perfectly for this situation. It's got a little nice Regency style puffed sleeve. We can see a little bit of her chemise peeking out the bottom of that sleeve, and the sleeve is kind of the main point of interest in this gown because it is a Regency gown and therefore there is not much else going on. It has, of course, got that high waist, and then we're going to have a little bit of her chemise again peeking up from the neckline as well. So cover number 4, called Venus in Winter. This one is following the life of Bess of Hardwicke, who is an actual historical figure, which means we do actually have pinpointable references and dates to work from, which puts us around 1550s. This is very quintessentially what we think of Tudor. The bodices with these wide strips of trim going across the front and down the sides. This was all very common. We shall keep this, albeit in a slightly different configuration. The bodices in this period, they either are quite high up or they have this curve that makes them come quite high up on the chest. This center chest area would have been covered with some sort of partlet, and these were often heavily decorated with embroidery, gold work, black work, because it is sort of a central feature of the outfit, so why not just cover it in decoration? It does also look like they have got the essence of the shoulder rolls that were very popular in this period. Although in this period they could be quite pronounced, very high, very prominent. So we are going to make that a little bit more of a feature. They're not striped generally, but they're paned. What you would see as stripes on the sleeves and on the shoulder rolls are actually thin strips of fabric, underneath which is either the chemise that is pulled through into puffs, or they are mock chemise that are stitched in. These strips of trim or these panes would be just heavily embroidered, gold worked, embellished, beaded. They would also often put a little chain or a little belt just sort of at the waistline. In this period, we're not quite at the big drum-shaped Elizabethan skirts yet, but we are either wearing cone-shaped farthingales or we're just wearing little bum pads on the hips. So she would have had a little bit of definition at the waist area of the skirt. These would have been cartridge pleated, which it does look like she has going on, or they could be pleated. In terms of what's going on at the wrist, we're not going to do the lace thing that she's got going on. That is a little bit more sort of early Jacobean, these big, thick lace cuffs. Instead, we are going to replace those with what is called a suit of ruffs, which is the 2 ruffs that go at the wrist as well as a matching one at the neck. She doesn't have a ruff at the neck, which is appalling. Ruffs are like a big deal. She's a noblewoman. Ruffs at this point are on the upward trajectory to becoming the big, elaborate, ridiculous things that they would become by the early 17th century. And then of course, each of those little curls have to be set with hot irons. Those setting patterns can get vastly elaborate, especially by the early 17th century when the ruff just gets ridiculous. The setting patterns for these can get just unbelievable. It was a blatant display of wealth because here's a thing that I can afford to wear and pay someone to professionally have washed and reset frequently. And in all of her portraiture that we have, she is wearing a small ruff. So it does make sense to put her in a ruff for this portrait. I know we find those weird and we don't really like those very much, especially for the purposes of beautiful aesthetic romance novel covers, but hear me out, we're putting her in a ruff. It's going to be gilt on the edges and it's going to be beautiful. She also probably would not have her hair down at this point in her life, and we do see this in all of the real Bess of Hardwicke portraiture. We could see a little bit of it at the front in little puffs, but for the most part it would be very nice and secure under a cap and then under a French hood. Our next selection is An Extraordinary Union, which takes place during the American Civil War. Focuses on a woman who is a spy. Firstly, let us begin with the hair. Her hairstyle in this is actually quite good. The 1860s, the mid-19th century, this period is very simple, it's very sleek. The hair is really just sort of center parted or V-parted and then pulled back into a low bun just at the back of the head. And this goes for Black women as well. We do have pictorial evidence of that. So her hairstyle is actually pretty good. We do have imagery of day-wear women just with little sprigs of leaves in their hair, which is interesting. So we're gonna put something in her hair just because that seems nice. Initially, when I was looking at this cover, I was like, this isn't the worst. Like, this is kind of a beautiful, like, late Regency, and then I realized it's American Civil War, so it's 1860s, and this is completely the wrong time period. We can keep her in a white dress. White is definitely still a thing that she can be wearing. She is a spy, she is in various different situations, and presumably can get her hands on all sorts of clothing. So in this sort of 1850s, 1860s period, there is a style of sleeve known as the pagoda sleeve, which becomes really, really popular. It is a very wide sort of robe-like sleeve. It's slightly slimmer at the top of the arm and then gets nice and sort of wide and bell-shaped down at the bottom. These could be trimmed and very often were fringed at the bottoms. They really did love their fringe in this period. The sleeves later on sort of climb up and up and up until by the 1890s you have these very sort of tall, upright sleeve heads just sitting right at the tops of the shoulders. They are given this sort of triangular shape at the front to make the shoulders look slightly wider, which makes the waist look smaller. And of course the big wide crinoline skirts help to just make the waist look absolutely tiny. It is time we must address, inevitably, the 18th century Scottish Highlander story. I feel like this is a romance genre in and of itself. So this next story, which is Love with a Scottish Outlaw, takes place in 1727, I believe. We have a lot going on with this cover. First of all, the woman is wearing a pretty decent Regency gown. But as we have previously discussed, this is not the Regency period. It is not even close to the Regency period. Unfortunately, there is not much you can do about the time period if you are writing a Scottish romance, and the time period sort of has to be taking place before 1746, before the Highlands kind of have all of their culture wiped out until like the early 19th century. It's George IV who sort of reignites this obsession with Scottish culture. The entire time before that is the Highland clearances. They are trying to take away the tartans and the Scottish dress and the Scottish culture. So it is very much not a thing to have an affinity for Scottish culture or the Highlands, not just dress, but anything, way of life really. She shouldn't be wearing a Regency dress. She should be wearing a sort of circa 1720s dress. One thing we see very prevalently in a lot of the early 18th century dresses are these big, wide robings that come down the front of the dress, and they are sort of worn a bit like robes. Prevalently, there is the sack dress, which sort of has no shape at all, but it's just this very big, wide dress with a big cape at the back. There is the Mantua style dress, which sort of carries over the style from the 1690s, where the back of the dress is sort of draped up and over to form almost the essence of a bustle. And then of course, a bit more rarely, we do have more fitted gowns. We're gonna put her in one of these more fitted gowns because I know that's what the romance genre probably wants, but we're still going to hold on to some of these elements of very classic early 18th century dress. We've got the big wide sleeves with the big wide cuffs, which is very much a feature of earlier 18th century dress. Interestingly enough, they have done her hair up in this cover design, which I highly commend them for doing. Unfortunately, this is like one of the few periods in which we do have portraiture evidence of people with the long, flowing, half-done-up hair. So we will do her with a little updo and a couple of those sort of 18th century curls coming down. I know we're gonna hate this, but he really does need his powdered hair. Whether it's a wig, it doesn't necessarily have to be. It could also just be his natural hair. These styles are very easy to do naturally. Now, I'm not entirely sure what's going on with the shirt situation on the original cover. Shirts are not constructed like that in this period. The shirts of this period are as you think of the puffy poet shirts and the pirate shirts, they've got a deep V down the front of it to get the shirt on and off the head, but for the most part they are these very big, very fluffy, but closed down the front shirts. They're gathered into a cuff down at the sleeve, so they are long sleeved. They've got collars that could, be drawn up. The other thing is, she would not be bare-legged, probably. It does get a bit chilly up in Scotland, and it is standard practice to wear stockings. These stockings are about knee length, and they are held up with garters. She would be wearing stockings. He would also be wearing, hose, and once again, his hose would be held up with garters. Okay, we need to have a slight conversation about tartan, because the cover designer did, in theory, do the vaguely correct research for this. Delving through the tartan registry, it does appear that he is wearing some variation of the Buchanan tartan, which area-wise, it all checks out. The trouble is, clan tartans are not a thing before the whole romanticization of Scottish culture in the Regency period. This whole idea that there are very specific clan tartans that are very specific to this region and they can only wear this tartan if they're from this clan, it's all nonsense to the 18th century. A lot of it was sort of invented based on a source that was supposedly discovered from the 18th century, although cannot necessarily be verified as having actually existed in the 18th century and not having been just completely fabricated by the people who introduced this source. The theory as to where these clan tartans come from is that people based in different regions of the Highlands would have had access to certain dyes, certain materials, trading with certain people, access to other trade routes in other parts of the world, and that would dictate what dyes they had access to and therefore what colors they would wear. Theoretically, where we get this idea of different clans wearing different specific colors, there is some basis of evidence and basis of truth to that, but it would not be as necessarily strictly adhered to as we necessarily think it would have been today. The kilt sort of starts out as a very simplistic garment and a very practical one. It's not sewn up and it's not really a garment, it is a plaid, it is a length of fabric. But for the men, it was a very long, between 6 to 9 yards of material that would be laid out on the ground and sort of pleated up in the middle to give it that nice volume in the back. And then you would lay down on the floor, tie a belt up around you, stand up, and you would effectively have that draped kilt shape. These are highly practical garments that are very versatile and existed for a reason. And there we have our cover redesigns. These are not about to hit the bestseller shelves anytime soon because this is not what marketing is for the historical romance genre, but we know this very well. Anyway, I hope that was of use to you in terms of actually learning things about dress history. If not, I at least hope it was an entertaining little journey through some perhaps relaxing sketching and painting content. If you would like to stick around for some more dress history and historical dress construction and general shenanigans content, do stick around. Oh, I'm supposed to tell you to subscribe. Do that thing. Oh, gosh. Otherwise, don't do that. I wish you well on your merry journey throughout the general YouTubes, and I shall see you, or not, anon. This video has been brought to you by Acorn TV, the fabulous commercial-free streaming service specializing in mysteries, dramas, comedies, documentaries, and so much more. For just £4.99 a month or $6.99 a month, you can gain access to all sorts of unique and hard-to-find content, as well as beloved classics like Miss Fisher's Murder Mysteries, as well as copious adaptations of Agatha Christie. I am personally a regular haunter of the documentary section in particular, although the Acorn TV original series Harry Wilde kept me most excellent company during the sketching and painting portions of this video. It's a wonderful series about a retired literature professor turned private investigator and has the most sublime cozy mystery vibes, complete with copious literature references, and I can very, very highly recommend. Content can be streamed via Apple and Android devices, Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and more, with new content added every Monday so that you never run out of new things to watch. With Acorn TV, there is always something new to discover. Try Acorn TV free for 30 days by going to acorn.tv and using my promo code Bernadette, all lowercase. Happy watching!